So very excited to be here today with you all to talk about culture and how it's shifted and what you all can do to make sure that you're using your employees' voices to, make sure that we're doing the best we can to make sure our cultures are strong. So I'm Teresa Preister. I am an Insights Analyst with Quantum Workplace. And I am joined today with Nicole Davies, VP of Talent Optimization at Valet Living. And so I'm going to go through part of the presentation, and then we're going to actually have a conversation about how Nicole has utilized some of these methods and things to improve culture and employee listening at Valet Living. So Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Of course. Hello, everyone. So excited to be with you today and to be partnering with Quantum Workplace to talk with you about culture. As Teresa said, I am the VP of Talent Optimization at Valet Living. Valet Living is a multifamily company, so we work with apartment buildings, and essentially we allow time recapture for busy people. So we do all kinds of amenities to make life easier for folks living in apartment complexes, from taking out their trash and recycling, delivering packages, cleaning their homes, walking their dogs, anything that they need to get a little bit more of that precious time back in their day. So I look forward to talking to you a little later on in the presentation about how we've had some significant cultural shifts at Valet Living and how those played out. So more from me in a little bit. Teresa, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nicole. All right, so let's get down to it. Today we're going to have a discussion about what organizational culture is, why it matters to employees. This information is not only based on kind of what we know about org culture, but based on research that we've done utilizing a lot of employee feedback that we received through our Best Places to Work contest and other collection other ways that we collect employee listening data. We want to help you understand how you can leverage employee listening to improve your culture, because we know that employee voices are important, and that culture is a huge part of why people might want to stay and grow with your organization. And then we're going to get to the fun part, talking with Nicole more about how Valet Living improves their culture using some of our tools, and so that'll be a fun conversation. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to take some time to really unpack organizational culture. When we talk about culture, we can really put any definition we want to it, but we wanted to really understand what it was and why it's top of mind right now, because it is very much top of mind right now. So a couple of factors play into this. So the rise of remote and hybrid work is a big part of this. I don't think anyone would disagree with me in saying that the last few years have been chock full of change, really causing us to have to shift how and where we work. Not only that shift, but some organizations trying to shift back almost. Because remote and hybrid work have increased so significantly, it changes essentially how employees experience workplace culture. So we want to dive into that. We want to think about that as we're thinking about our culture. The great recruitment, the great resignation, the great reshuffling, whatever word you want to put on it, that has a big impact on culture as well. I think organizations really understand that culture is important when people may be looking to make a switch or accept a job offer with another organization. Right now, there are more openings than there are available employees, which leads to an extremely competitive labor market where the power dynamic has shifted a little bit. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the unemployment rate this past May was 3.6%. That's really low, and it's really low considering the annual average for 2021 was at 5.3%. So that labor market where we're going to find employees and talent is just really tight. There are more jobs than there are people, so that makes it a tight labor market. And then culture has really gone viral. There's been so many discussions around it. It contributes to the more and more discussion there is around it contributes to the great, the great reshuffling, the great recruitment, when people are seeing maybe these great cultures or maybe these not so great cultures that are being talked about in the news and at their kitchen tables and amongst their friends and things like that. So it's really important for us to understand that this is a moment where culture is in the spotlight, and it's something that we really need to pay attention to. But I would definitely argue not only, paying attention to your culture at a time when things are really tight in the labor market and we're kind of battling for employees, but all the time. When we think about setting ourselves up for success long term with culture, it's a long game. It's not something that you can maybe change or shift really very quickly. So we need to keep that in mind when we're thinking about this. So that kind of leads me here to defining organizational culture. So again, like I mentioned, you can think of culture, you can think of any various ways of defining culture. Sometimes people think of beer fridges, people come into work in their PJs, ping pong tables, things like that. Those images might appear in your brain, but really what those are kind of artifacts of a culture. When we think a little bit harder about what culture actually really is, it's really the way that we do things. It's how we make decisions, how we communicate with our people, how we reward, recognize, and celebrate our people, and how we behave and the behavior that we condone and we celebrate. So culture is something that is a lot more than beer fridges and ping pong tables and dress codes. It's really something that is defined by the way that we do our work. And that is, like I mentioned before, it's a long game. It's instilling these values and practices into how we do things so that our people feel connected to the culture. They feel valued by the culture. They feel like this is a place I want to be, even if I potentially get a really large salary offer or something along those lines, but understanding that these elements are why people stay with organizations and want to continue to thrive with organizations. All right. So we did some research about where culture thrives, and I'd like to ask you all. We'll get to the answers from our research here in a moment, but I'd like to ask you all, which workplace aspect do you think employees experience organizational culture most strongly? So you can see the poll question here. I'd like you to pick one which you feel they experience culture most strongly, and kind of keeping in mind that when we think about culture, every organization has one. It exists whether or not it is something that we are actively working towards developing or maintaining or making as good as it could be. So when we think about not only what do we want our culture to be, but what is it? Because we can have aspirations as much as possible, but when it comes down to what it actually is, that's something we can't just write on a piece of paper and expect people to identify with. When it comes to strong cultures and or not so strong cultures, it really is how we behave and how we do things. Okay, so we have our poll results. So it looks like rituals or norms. Folks, 35% of you thought rituals or norms are where people identify with culture the most. Then it looks like recognition, celebrations. And then we have a pretty big gap until we get to onboarding, training, or approach to employee performance. Then missions and value statements are actually the last. So let's take a peek. Let's see how you did. And let's look at the stats that we found through our research on where employees experience organizational culture most strongly. So it's a bit of a flip-flop. So mission or value statement is actually one of the top 3 results in the top results. So people feel connected and experience a culture through the mission of the organization. Next one here is recognition or celebrations. So recognizing, celebrating people and the work that they're doing and what they're contributing to the organization. And the third one there, the top three, is approach to employee performance. That was one of the lowest there. The bottom three results, where people are experiencing culture the least, is actually rituals or norms. The next is onboarding and training, and the last one there is a physical workplace, workspace. You all got that one right. That one is the least connected. So when we hear talk about people coming back into the office and feeling like we all need to be in one place to experience culture and collaborate and things like that, this isn't quite jiving with that sentiment, right? It really is more of how we do things, not necessarily the proximity to each other at which we do things. So that's kind of interesting to see. And I believe you all will get our research brief on this topic afterwards, so you can kind of dig into that a little bit more. Thank you for participating with me there. All right. So next we're going to shift gears a little bit around org culture change. Change has been a huge part of our lives over the last few years. So we asked folks, would you say the culture of your organization has improved, declined, or remained the same over the last 2 years? So when we break that down by remote hybrid workplace employees, we see that remote and hybrid employees were more likely to have seen their org culture improve when compared with workforce-based employees. Most employees are seeing their workplace at least improve or kind of remain the same, or they're neutral on the subject. And then off to the side here, over 35% of employees say the culture in their organization has changed dramatically over the past 2 years. That's not surprising to me. We've had to change over the last 2 years. Folks have been in kind of a perpetual change cycle, whether it's preparing to, go remote, working remote, changing the way we do things, to potentially feeling like we have to kind of shift back to normal, which I would argue we're never going to be able to get back to normal necessarily. So these results aren't surprising, because culture has had to shift. What's a little bit surprising is that our remote employees are more likely to say that the culture has improved over the last 2 years. But very similar, our hybrid employees have also said that it has improved over the last 2 years. So, it's encouraging when we think about having to work through the kind of the schematics of where we're working, how we're collaborating with each other. So this is encouraging, right? When we look at that, the majority of employees feel like it has improved or at least remained the same. Okay. So when we talk about, or when we connect culture to engagement, there's a strong connection there. We see that those who say their culture is positive are 3.8 times more likely to be engaged. So we know that there's a connection there. Obviously, if you're experiencing a positive culture, it's pretty logical to think that you might be more engaged with the organization, the team that you're working for, and the work that you're doing itself. So when we say employee engagement, we have the definition here. When we talk about employee engagement, we're talking about the mental and emotional connection employees feel toward their work, their team, and their organization. So all three of these elements are extremely critical to engaging people within their workplace, in their work, and to their teams. And that really, you can think of that, those three elements, as kind of a three-legged stool, right? If one of these elements is missing or is less robust than the other, the stool isn't quite as balanced, right? And it could potentially topple over, especially if there's a lack in one or two of these altogether. So we really want to make sure that we're not just focusing on the org, right? We're also focusing on the pieces of the employee experience that are really central to folks every day, and that's the work that they're doing and the team that they're on or the people that they're working with. Okay, so now that we have talked about where employees generally experience culture the most, we're going to dive into how they want to experience organizational culture. Because when we really think about it, employees are our largest resource. They are obviously very much in demand right now. There's kind of a supply and demand issue there. So when we're thinking about pure economics, we need to make sure that our people are happy and that they're experiencing a positive organizational culture. So let's talk a little bit about that. So when we talked to some highly engaged employees, some not highly engaged employees, when we're doing our research, when we're gathering that data, those who were highly engaged said that their workplace culture was caring, supportive, positive, and engaging, right? That kind of just, those words just kind of make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, don't they? They sound like a place you want to work. On the opposite end of the spectrum, those who were not highly engaged described their workplace culture as demanding, disorganized, stressful, and professional. So kind of reading those gives me a little bit of anxiety. Whereas when we asked employees, what is your ideal workplace culture? Their top three were flexible, inclusive, and supportive. And then in the kind of the middle of that Venn diagram, there's some additional pieces here in terms of fun, collaborative, friendly, diverse. So these are the things that matter to employees. They are looking for places that embody these aspects. So when it comes to the great resignation, the great recruitment, the great reshuffling, et cetera, employees may be out actively seeking these things, but it's within your power to make these elements essential to your own culture and to make it a great place to work. So how can we kind of bridge the gap there, right? There's a lot of information out there on what a culture should be, on what the ideal culture looks like, you know, what cultures maybe have worked in the past, et cetera. But I would definitely say that things have shifted. So really, honestly, my best practice recommendation would be ask your people, right? They know what they're looking for your organization as opposed to the organization down the street, or maybe for your ideal employee as opposed to an employee in a different industry. Those needs and wants might be slightly different. So while best practices are great in theory, they don't always meet the needs of your specific organization. So my advice to you is to ask your people. Ask them what they need as opposed to maybe just assuming that we know what they need. So at Quantum Workplace, we subscribe to a pretty simple framework. It's based on this flywheel here, and that is ask, aha, and act. So we're going to break these down and talk about how we can use this really, really simple framework to stand up an employee listening program that's going to help you all get or develop and maintain the culture that your employees are seeking. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first one is you have to ask, right? I spent quite a few years as an HR practitioner, and I distinctly remember feeling like I had a really good pulse on the workforce, feeling like I knew what the people I supported were dealing with, what their challenges were, what the strengths of their particular team or functional areas were. And I'm willing to bet that you all maybe have similar feelings or knowledge about those that you support, right? And that's pretty common. A lot of times when I'm working with my customers and we're talking about what they feel are their organizational challenges, HR tends to have a pretty good pulse on things, but they might not be 100% dialed in all the time. So that's why asking is so important, because it validates those hunches or what we think we know. Not only have I had instances where customers were pretty well on the money on what their challenges were, I've also have had instances where once the employee feedback comes back, the areas the employees feel are areas that need improving might not have been on HR or leadership's radar at all. So if we don't ask, we are missing a critical opportunity to truly understand and to have data, essentially business intelligence, to support the programs and the systems that we're putting in place to support a good culture and to help employees be engaged with the work that they're doing, the teams that they're a part of, and the organization that they're a part of. So this really asking, getting the data, really helps you to actually position employee feedback as critical business intelligence. I'm going to ask you to kind of step into your memory here and think of a time when you knew that something was critical to employee engagement or to fostering a positive culture within your organization, but you got maybe significant pushback from an executive leader or a leader of a department that, saying, oh, no, that isn't an issue. My employees are really happy with that, or things are going great in that area, blah, 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 blah. As leaders, it's really, really hard sometimes to see past our blind spots. And it can be really hard to admit that within our teams, there are issues that maybe we feel a little bit ill-equipped to handle. So that data is so important to setting the stage, to really helping people understand that this isn't just something that's an HR hunch, or this isn't employees just complaining or something like that. This is really true feedback from the people who are, making the organization successful. And then lay that on top of these people have options, right, to go other places and find cultures that suit them. So asking is absolutely extremely critical. So the next step in our fabulous flywheel here is aha, right? So we need to not only ask, but we need to really dig deep and understand, what does this feedback mean? What is the feedback? Truly kind of taking the rose-colored glasses off and looking at the information in front of you, the information that your employees have so graciously given you that they say is true about your organization. So your culture statements, your employee value propositions and things like that are really, really important. But if they don't align with what your employees are saying is what they're actually experiencing, we need to bridge that gap. We need to make sure that what we are telling not only our current employees, but also potential employees, is that actually lining up with the employee experience? Because, people coming in will pretty quickly figure out if there's a gap there, and they might feel a little bit slighted if there is a significant gap. So you can also use external benchmarking to understand how your employee value proposition or how your people are experiencing your culture lines up with those that maybe are in similar industries or similar size to you. So you can really understand, what's happening at those organizations that you may be competing with for talent. But what we tend to really subscribe to, external benchmarks are great, and we have a very robust set of external benchmarks. But what is really important, what we like to focus on is growth and movement, moving that employee engagement needle internally. So understanding that we are doing what what the employee feedback told us was going to help improve the culture, and then we want to measure again to see is that making a difference, and we want to see internal progress seeing progress against benchmarks is fantastic, but internal progress is really where it's at. So we want to make sure we're using kind of all of the tools at our disposal to understand what does this information mean, and hopefully, and the idea, and what happens very, very often is that it impacts your recruitment and retention efforts. So kind of the last element of this flywheel is ACT. This is arguably probably the most critical area, but also the most difficult thing to do. Again, stepping into our minds here for a second, think of a time when you had feedback. The feedback told you maybe what you should do, where you should go with this initiative, et cetera, and then it got stalled. Or you decided to go a different direction because someone thought a different direction was better than what your employees told you they needed. That's very common, and that's really hard to work around. But this is the absolute critical piece. When we think about taking action on employee feedback, if employees don't see that action has been taken as a result of the feedback they've given, they're a lot less likely to give feedback in the future, and they're a lot less likely to want to participate in these types of initiatives, because very quickly folks can feel like, well, my feedback doesn't matter, or I could take this survey, but they're not going to do anything with it anyway, so what's the point of wasting my time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So acting is absolutely important, but in addition to this, communication about what was acted upon and how you arrived at the decision to do what you're doing, et cetera, that's also extremely critical. We need to connect the dots for employees between the feedback they gave and the initiatives that were put in place or the changes that were made at an organization, et cetera. So when we talk about acting, we're really talking about, like it says on the screen, making necessary adjustments to how we do things. So it may take time. Some things may be very, very simple to implement. We call those just kind of low-hanging fruit, right? Some organizations get feedback around potentially, let's say, materials and equipment that people need to do their jobs. Maybe they're lacking something. And the organization can say, aha, that's something we can act on right away and we can make a tangible difference now. There are other things that are a little bit more difficult, right? Whether it's manager effectiveness, career growth and development tends to be an area that a lot of organizations struggle with, et cetera. So it's really important to understand that some things will be fairly quick and easy to implement, but some things will take a lot of intention, will take a lot of time. And that's where we get into making sure that you're intentional about culture. Because as I said previously, culture is going to be whether or not you and your organizational leaders and your managers shape it or not. So we would really probably prefer that the culture be what we want it to be and what we say it is to potential employees, et cetera. Because if we don't do that, it can unintentionally evolve or change into something that we no longer recognize or is no longer valuable to us or our employees. All right. So now that I've been talking for quite a long time, we have a basis of how employees experience culture, how employees want to experience culture. And I am so excited to add to the screen here Nicole Davies, as we met her earlier, VP of Talent Optimization at Valet Living. So welcome, Nicole. Thanks for joining me today. I'd like to kind of chat with you a little bit about how Valet Living kind of took this framework of employee listening and maybe solved a problem or maybe helped employees connect with culture engagement more than they had in the past.
Love it. And thanks again for including me. We have lots of cultural misconnections that we've been able to tackle through listening, so I'm excited to share a couple today. As I said at the top, Valet Living provides concierge services for apartment buildings, and we do that across 40 different states. and we touch almost 2 million different doors or 2 million different homes a day. So we have lots of people out there doing lots of great work on behalf of Valley Living. But you can imagine with such a geographically dispersed workforce, culture is tricky. You know, our corporate office is just one of many, many, many locations that represents Valley Living. And so we have to spend a lot of time being very intentional about gathering the voices of our associates together, doing those listening tours to really get those strong feedback loops, and then figuring out how to act on the way that we know it can touch and reach all 8,000 plus of our associates across 40 states. And so when I was thinking about our time together today, Teresa, I have a couple examples, but one of the ones that first came to mind was that idea that when I first came on board 5 years ago, we got tons of feedback when we asked around questions around health and well-being and feeling known and cared about, that our manager and associate connections were tenuous. A lot of times their managers sit in different locations from them. They may work different hours from them. We may have our associates working at night and our managers working by day. And folks just didn't feel like they were known as a person per se, by their manager. They didn't have those connections. And so our aha came from asking those questions around those particular topics to say, okay, we've got a connection gap here. We're lacking connection. And what that's causing is those feelings of invincibility. Folks didn't feel like they could be vulnerable to say, things aren't going well, or I'm not getting what I need, or I don't feel supported, or I don't feel heard. And as we know, that connection and vulnerability are key components of trust. So what we determined was we had a trust problem. We had our associates doing great work, but they didn't trust necessarily that they were seen or known by the organization, or that the organization was making decisions to support them. So that was a real challenge for us, as you can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about, you had the aha, right? You asked the question, you had the aha. What actions did you and Valley Living take to bridge that gap?
Yeah. So one of my big goals when I came on board was really to think about what are the intentional opportunities that we have managers and their teams connecting, their direct reports connecting. And when we really were honest about it, we had one guaranteed connection a year, which was our annual performance review process, right? Just that one time a year. And so we dug in around that and said, is it working? And of course, I'm sure this is not a story that you guys are going to expect as a cliffhanger ending. It wasn't, right? Managers hated it. Associates didn't feel valued. Nobody really was doing a great job with that conversation. And so we said, no more annual performance review process. And so we eliminated it. And we went instead to a focused monthly performance conversation. And so the conversations are queued up on the first of every month. Every manager and every associate connects intentionally around whatever the topic of the month may be. And they vary quite a bit. They talk about personal wellness. They talk about career aspiration and development. They talk about, of course, how are things going on the job? Do you have the resources you need? How can I, as your manager, support you in being able to ensure that you have the type of success you're looking for in your career here? And they're very future focused. So we wanted to get out of that finger pointing, looking backwards. You didn't do what I wanted you to do 2 months ago, and instead talk about the aspirational look of what can we do over the next 30 days to really achieve success in your role here and the work that we do here. And so that was a huge cultural shift for us. We moved from, one not so fancy, not so wonderful conversation a year to a minimum of 12 intentional performance-based connection points with very focused questions so that we know confidently from my team on talent optimization side, the entire organization is having the same type of conversation. We know everybody this month is talking about what matters most to them in the work that they do. What are the things that they love or they loathe? What are they looking for over the next 90 days? And so we have a lot of confidence going forward that we're getting really current data. We're getting really current listening back from those associates, which allows us to be much more nimble as we start to move forward.
Right. That is awesome. That's music to my ears, obviously. And, we love working with Valley Living. But on the other side of things aren't always completely rosy. Sometimes there are thorns, right? So can you walk us through maybe some hiccups or maybe some pushback that you got. I can already kind of anticipate maybe what the managers said when you told them they would have to have 12 conversations a year. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there was a lot of celebration initially when we did away with the annual performance review because everybody hated that process. And there was a lot of excitement around it being forward-looking. You know, nobody likes to be that person that feels like they have to deliver that negative feedback. And so we trained a lot around being generous in their curiosity, assuming positive intent, positioning things moving forward to be able to allow the associate to see how he or she can be successful. So some of that was really super well received. Now, the questions every month, I would get a little pushback on occasion because, you know, some of our managers came from that mindset of we leave work at work and we leave home at home, and those two lines don't cross, right? We don't want to hear about people's daycare struggles or they're, you know, working from home with a brand new baby and they're not getting enough sleep. We don't talk about that stuff, right? And so we had to do some work around bringing the whole person to work and what that looks like and being able to really talk about that confidently and understanding that our associates don't feel known if the only thing they're talking about is their work version of themselves. And so getting managers comfortable with that idea of knowing the whole human and caring about and for the whole human was definitely a bit of a challenge. And our teams, to be honest with you, you know, I really enjoy what Marcus Buckingham says about what's the ideal size, what's the ideal span of control for a manager. And he says the maximum amount of people that you can have an intentional conversation with every week is his model. And so some of our managers said, look, I just have too big of a team to do a great job with this. And I go and ask my people like, hey, I'm a little rushed, a little busy. Do you want to do this? And of course, some of our folks are like, yeah, it's all right, no big deal. And so we had to get them out of that mindset of like, this is just something that's an add-on to the other work you do. No, this is the work you do. As you said during your time presenting, you know, our entire value prop is our people. So if we're not spending the time to really hear them, know them, get to understand their aspiration and their drive, we're not getting the best out of them. And so doing that work around engagement and helping our managers to correlate that time spent, even if it is, you know, to them feeling like the bottom of the priority list at times, is really value-added time because they're getting more for their money, so to speak, from their associates.
Right, exactly. You hit the nail on the head there. When it comes to the employees, so the vast majority of the employee population, how did they react? And what impact have you seen on them, retention, turnover, things like that, since implementing this?
You know, we've been very fortunate. We have really great participation rates. Of course, my team monitors those, and we look for quality of question. You know, are we getting the types of responses we would expect to see for the types of questionings we're positioning? And interestingly, you know, we average somewhere around 85% almost every month that participates in the process. So we get really nice traction there. The months where we really dig in deep on the human side, we have much higher levels of participation. So our people love that opportunity to really talk about themselves and what drives them and motivates them and gets them excited. And sometimes those questions, the managers, you know, like to give me a little bit of a hard time sometimes because they feel like they're a little soft, right? How is this performance-related discussion? But, you know, really understanding, you know, if I have a job that is 85% spreadsheets and 15% human contact, and I love that 15%, but I dread the 85, well, then maybe we need to talk about career pathing and what are your options? Where else might we have an opportunity for you in the organization that might be a better fit and get you a little bit more of that love and a little less of that loathe component of your job. The other big thing I do want to point out is I thought about it as you talked about mission and values. What we heard through these performance conversations was folks didn't feel connected to the mothership, we'll call it, to the home office, right? They didn't necessarily understand what was important. You know, they were out there knowing what their manager expected of them, and they felt like they had a clear idea of good work in their job, but they didn't necessarily understand how they fit into the bigger picture. How do we align with how Valet Living wins? How do we win in the marketplace? And so that process really bled us into a lot more listening around goal setting and accountability. And what we determined was this really gigantic need for crowdsourcing messages. we needed to do a better job of communicating those guiding set of values that we had. We have a leadership standard document that we use, which guides our decisions, but making it personal for every associate to understand how their piece fits into the larger puzzle. And so from that initial round of conversations with performance, we've broadened it to where we're doing monthly podcasts. We call them our This is Living podcasts, where our leaders will podcast out to the entire 8,000 plus associate population. This is the stuff we're talking about. Here's how it aligns with our organizational values. Here's, your piece of how it plays out. This is the direction we're thinking about going. And we've seen that it's really helped create some alignment down to that individual part-time worker who's working 7 to 10 at night with the actions that are happening day in and day out from our corporate office. And so, I will say, once you start to peel back the onion, you will get all the layers, Teresa, right? You're going to find that you open the box on listening in one area, and it's going to give you an opportunity to understand you've got not only one aha, but 6 that are going to come, following after that initial one.
Right, and that brings up a great point in having the ability and the bandwidth to act on all of the feedback that you've been getting. So really putting time and resources towards something like this is so incredibly important. You talked about opening up opportunities for other points of listening. Can you tell us a little bit about what other maybe points in the employee life cycle or points you are asking for feedback from your people, not just in performance?
Yeah, well, we ask them for opinions on everything, for good or for bad. So, what really started our listening tour, of course, was our annual engagement survey. So we were looking at questions that were most important to us. We collect a lot of fantastic data through that. And so in my world, I was, hyper-focused on manager effectiveness and, cultural indoctrination, and are they feeling like they're part of a team? Do they feel valued and heard? And so, we used all of that to then spiral out to focus groups and those one-on-one conversations and, just listening tours. All of our leaders went on listening tours and had an opportunity to really kind of dig in deep around the themes that they were hearing. And of course, our folks are not shy about letting us know their needs once we start asking those questions. And so what we found, I will say, Teresa, is that we needed a lot of resources quickly. So we were getting a lot of folks with a lot of perspectives, and they were saying, we love this company, but we don't see a pathway forward. You guys are asking questions around career goals and developments in our one-on-one, but what do we, I'm telling you I have more to give. What are my options, right? So from that, we spiraled out and, started to use, a more robust talent review process. We've started to collect all of our folks who have their hands up saying, yes, I'd like to move around or up and or on in the organization. We've universally captured that through our succession planning process. We're really trying to build career architecture so folks can see levels and understand how to move up and around in the organization. And all of that was born from those initial performance conversations and listening to our conversations that we had that, as I said, kind of gave us this need for a much more robust talent platform across the board, not just performance, but performance leading into talent, into succession planning and beyond.
Talk about business intelligence. Am I right? I mean, that's the key. If your employees are the key to your success, business intelligence is understanding them. So, I love that. I love that. So I have one more question before we're going to open things up for questions from our attendees. Kind of the elephant in every room lately. How did all of this go when the world turned upside down and you had to walk through COVID a couple years ago?
Yeah, well, we were so thankful, again, as I said, geographically distributed already. So much of our workforce is already comfortable with remote work and understanding that, they were often operating in a market of one already. But what we did have to do was get communications out very quickly to shift the types of work that we do. So as I shared, some of our services are walking dogs, cleaning people's apartments, going into their homes and doing things with and for them. And, when COVID happened, all of that came to a halt. Folks were home. They didn't need us to be walking dogs. They didn't necessarily want us in there cleaning. They were taking care of those needs themselves. And so we had 8,000 folks and said, okay, now what? We've got this opportunity. We're committed to keeping our folks engaged. And what we found, Teresa, is that we were able to shift, having these now robust communication channels and having these really intentional connections with our managers, we were able to shift those workers into the aspects of our business that were super busy. Package delivery went up 1 bajillion %. Everybody was getting stuff delivered to home, right? So we were making sure that those boxes were getting delivered to doors instead of, stacking up in mail rooms. We were cleaning the shared spaces, elevator buttons and handrails. And so, we may not be cleaning your home, but we're cleaning the common spaces where you might be nervous about, going out into your property if those things aren't being well taken care of. And so not only were we able to thrive with our existing workforce, we actually grew. We were considered essential workers, so we were allowed to keep everybody working, and we were able to kind of pivot with our properties, our communities that we work with, to deepen our engagement levels with them and their residents. So COVID, thankfully, we, like everyone else, have felt the impact of the Great Resignation and the things that have been happening since we also are in a war for talent. We want to keep our part-timers engaged. But we found that, again, having those pre-established listening channels and having a culture that allowed folks to know how to communicate back with the larger organization and have a deeper connection with their manager created a successful, kind of traversing through the wilderness that was COVID for us.
That's fantastic. That's a great example of being kind of prepared, right? And that preparation really paying off in a time that none of us thought we would have to go through. So thank you so much. Well, I'd love to open it up for questions. So we can take any questions that have come in through the chat, and either Nicole or I, or we can decide who answers it either way.
Perfect. As a reminder, to submit questions, please use the Q&A panel located on the bottom right side of your screen. Please type your question into the text field and hit send. Please keep the drop-down as all panelists. All right, our first question is, where do you get the research results on how people experience culture? Is there a cited publication? How large was the sample size?
That is a great question. I don't have on hand the sample size right now, but we actually use our Best Places to Work data. So Quantum Workplace is the engine behind Best Places to Work contests across the country. So we survey around 9,000 organizations every year in different marketplaces, different industries, different demographics, and things like that. So that's where that pool of data comes from, is from our Best Places to Work contest participants, and they're able to opt into that if they'd like to. Great question.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, how did you scale the continuous performance conversations to make them meaningful?
Nicole, you want to take that one? Yeah.
Teresa, you want me to jump in?
Yeah, go ahead and take that one.
So, we hope they're meaningful. And again, we look at the quality of our feedback every single month. So we'll take a sample of our results to see if the types of questions that we're asking are yielding the answers that we would anticipate. And, that gives us the opportunity to go back and fine tune as we move forward. And as I said, our participation rate, thankfully, kind of hovers in that 85 to 86% range month over month. And so we feel like, folks vote with their actions. If they weren't getting meaningful dialogue out of them, we would start to see those participation rates drop. And so, we basically pulled the Band-Aid off when we partnered with Quantum, and they said, who do you want to start with? I said, everyone. I want to roll it out across all of our organizations. So we went big. We went with our sales folks. We went with our ops teams. We went with our corporate office. Everybody started at the same time. And I think there was just a lot of power in the positivity that was coming from the results we were getting, that the managers were receiving effective feedback from their folks that this was meaningful. And so we're 4 years in now, coming up on 5 in December, and we're not slowing down. We're just continuing to put those conversations out every month. And now, as I shared a minute ago, we've also layered in talent reviews. So we use the Quantum Workplace platform as well for our talent review process. So biannually, twice a year, our managers will go in and also answer conversation questions around potential. So we're layering performance with potential, which is giving us that really nice holistic view of the associate overall. Anything you want to add on to that, Teresa?
Oh, I think you hit it. I think that's great. And I really think it comes down to showing the value, right? So when things get tight in terms of time, when things get tough in terms of competing, competing priorities and things like that, it's really going back to, what's valuable to people and what's helping people do their best work. So sometimes that's pulling usage reports and stats and things like that from the system and showing those to leaders and, senior leaders or company leaders and things like that to really kind of keep people excited and interested in what it is that we're doing because it is so valuable to the employee population.
Great, thank you. And our next question. I am curious about the type of questions to ask. We recently conducted a survey, and there are focus areas where we scored low. Do we ask specifically about those areas or general culture questions? For example, how do you see our culture and how does it need to change or enhance to make you feel more engaged?
That's a great question because when it comes down to designing, let's say, like a full employee census or employee engagement survey, we're trying to kind of understand the employee experience from a lot of different angles. And what we do at Quantum Workplace is we have our validated set of 9 engagement items that actually measure engagement at that point in time. And then for the rest of the items on the survey, which are questions around, career growth and development, manager effectiveness, individual needs, future outlook, all of those different things, we gather that information and we understand that information, but we also do a correlation analysis between the measure of engagement and those other cultural elements that people experience every day. And that actually tells us what cultural elements of the employee experience are actually most important to engagement at your organization. So that helps you focus. It can help you say, okay, so maybe career growth and development, maybe that didn't score as low as individual needs or whatever other item. But through our analysis, we understand that that's actually more important to employee engagement than this other piece. So we're actually going to focus here. So that's where it's important we want to ask the questions that we are going to be able to act on, first of all, right? We don't want to ask anything that's maybe pie in the sky, right? We don't want to ask people if they want a raise and then when they say yes, we say no, right? That would be disengaging. But we want to then understand what's going to make the biggest impact on engagement because we know that there's no way you can act on everything within a certain time frame. So that's really where we focus it. And then for additional employee feedback, like Nicole was talking about. So after you get your engagement survey back, you might have a few more questions for a certain group around a certain topic, and that might be a focus group. That might be sitting down with different people from different areas of the business to understand it a little bit more. So really, the engagement survey is kind of your jumping off point. And then from there, we can hone in on what's going to make the biggest difference and where we need to gather a little bit more detail to be able to, make change that's going to impact positively.
Great, thank you. Our next question, how do you, as someone who works in employee engagement, work around toxic leadership?
A great question. Nicole, do you want to take that one or do you want me to take that one?
Well, thankfully, we don't have a lot of toxic leadership at Valley Living. We try not to hold on to those folks, and we use our performance process to be able to know when those folks do exist in our organization. Really, we share success stories a lot. So, I will go and I will pull down, and of course, make it anonymous so that we're not, sharing anyone's, information in a public forum, but I'll share with them some of the sentiment that comes from our monthly conversations, our senior leadership team in particular, and just show them the power of asking these simple questions. We asked one question around, what's the greatest blocker to you getting, to you achieving what you want to achieve on a daily basis? And we got, 100 different, categories of blockers. And our senior leaders got super excited about that because that's power, right? That's data that allows them to make really important decisions about how do we remove obstacles to allow folks to be more effective. We asked a question around, if you could have one thing in the organization that would make your experience here better, what would it look like? We just brainstormed with 8,000 people, and, yes, we'd like more money and we'd like better this and better that. And, everybody gets a new car, kind of that Ellen DeGeneres mindset, right? We had some of that. But there was, a handful, a dozen really great ideas that our leaders were able to execute on right away. And so I think, and I'll pass it to you, Teresa, to answer it from the intellectual perspective. For us, it's using those wins to build momentum, and then the negative voices get silenced. Our positivity is able to overwhelm that, and folks are able to see how there's so much power in just having this information where we didn't before. Teresa, to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would piggyback off of that. The understanding that this data is business intelligence to help organizations be competitive, not only from a talent perspective, but also from an industry perspective, right? If your people are running your business and making you successful, the people are who we need to be listening to. So, there are some times when leaders are really resistant to something like this, where they view it as maybe more of a soft metric, right? As something that they aren't really putting a ton of stock in. And really, that's where the data comes in, and that's where, doing things like tying the data to, when we talk about employee life cycle surveys, I've had several examples where we maybe survey people when they start. Why did you come to us, right? And then we survey people kind of in the middle of their tenures and in engagement surveys and things like that, and they're telling us this is a block for me. This is something that I am not satisfied with or does not meet my needs. And then we survey them when they exit the organization. And a lot of times they tell us exactly why they're exiting, and it was something that they told us all the way along. And those types of stories are really, really powerful to say, this isn't a soft metric. This is something that's really important because turnover is expensive. Recruitment is expensive, and if we want to retain and grow our employee population to then continue to help the organization grow, we need to listen to them. So a lot of it comes down to having the data, and like I said in an earlier slide, I've been there, and not all organizations are like this, but back when I was an HR practitioner, I had plenty of instances where I had really good hunches and I had really good ideas, but I didn't have the data to back it up. It was more of a, well, that's good, but we think we're going to focus over here. You have the data and the feedback from the people, that becomes a lot more powerful than just HR having a hunch or thinking, I think we should do X, Y, Z.
Okay, great. Well, that was, we're about out of time. Do you have the last minute thoughts?
Obviously we have our website on here, so if you'd like to learn more about Quantum Workplace, please connect with us. I believe you're going to be sent the research information. So in regards to that earlier question, that sample size and all of that will be in the footnotes there. And, we'd love to answer any questions you might have, so connect with us online.